Welcome to Inside the Numbers, the RockDaisy Sports Performance Podcast, where we decode the data, science, and stories powering elite athlete development. I'm Ron McKeefrey, and in every episode, I'll be diving deep with top strength conditioning coaches, sports scientists, and performance experts who are driving the game forward using tech, insight, and grit. Welcome to Inside the Numbers, the podcast powered by RockDaisy, where we explore the intersection of sports science, data, and performance. Today's guest is Tony Villani, one of the premier speed coaches in the country. He's the founder of XPE Sports and the creator of the Shredmill. He's worked with dozens of elite NFL athletes and has been ahead of the curve when it comes to speed training and athletic development. Tony and I are around the same age, so I'm excited to dig into how he stayed at the top of his game while the industry around us has evolved dramatically. So, man, Tony, excited that you're on the show, man.
And I'm just honored you asked me, so very thankful to you.
Well, you've trained athletes for, over 2 decades. And from your perspective, how has the role of sports science evolved over time and, from the early 2000s to today?
I think sports science has almost proven some early adopters of speed training correct, if that makes sense. And now it's like I understand if they say you ain't tracking, you ain't training, but sometimes that gets hard to do in a group setting. Great. But what sports science has shown us is that if you're truly monitoring a few simple things, it's not that hard to get fast, right? And then you can, and you know more about it in a team setting, keep your speed in the season if you're manipulating just little things. And the old adage of, more is better. I don't know if it's common sense and knowledge now in our industry, but it's becoming, it seems more, is that smart is better and work hard. Not when you have to, work hard when you plan to, but let's get some gains out of you when we want to also.
Yeah, that was obviously when we came in, there was really very much kind of almost a religious type of mentality of you're either a certain type of philosophy, you fell into a certain, you're high intensity or you're traditional or, you kind of fell into these different buckets. And it was almost like a religious war, between the different factions. But how has, and obviously being a part of games, I've been a part of the game speed community. You've adapted it, and really kind of coined that term. And I know your work with Antoine Bolden and that's kind of led to that. But how has your philosophy at XPE evolved over the years to really kind of focus on that game speed?
I was just, we were getting very fast 40s at Indy and, and I knew speed was important. And I do like the term speed kills because it is an ultimate weapon. But I was like, how are all these guys succeeding in the NFL without speed, considered fast? And I just was picking their brain and they all kept saying the same thing. And they're like, we don't want to run. We want to move. We want to change directions efficiently. And I did a 5 to 10 fly session and Travis Kelce was there 4 years ago before he went on to have 3 of the best seasons in NFL history. And he couldn't get a 5-10 fly number under 1.32 seconds. And anybody that does that metric knows that's slow. But I thought he would actually play faster when we told him to stop because he could only go 1.32. Like the Jerry Rice, but he can run a route at 1.32. Well, once when I told him to start running and stopping past the lasers or bending, he slowed down to 1.38 to 1.40. He slowed down a lot. And that kind of threw me out of, and so did Mark Ingram when he was in year 7, he was still good. So did Denzel Ward. All the great players, when I told them we had a stop coming up, I thought they would play faster than the other players. If they didn't time as fast when they knew an agility thing was, they'd be fast. They actually played slower. Couldn't fathom it 4 to 5 years ago what that meant until we started coming up with some tests that coach changed the direction in the middle. And you start to learn that they were slowing down. I call it by a mere 3 or 4 hundredths more, which is like a half a mile an hour more. Mm-hmm. But then every time they changed directions, they were doing it 1, 2, or 3 tenths faster. So they were sacrificing a hundredths of speed timing to gain tenths of change of direction. And that to me became what playing fast was. I was like, oh, it's not increasing this max speed threshold so we play faster. That's track. We increase 100-meter times to run 200s faster. Or that's track. And I kind of saw it with my own eyes. And then I've really started testing it the last 4 years. And I'm like, every NFL player I get now that's elite can apply game speed principles within 1 or 2 sessions. And ones that can't, don't. And I'm not going to name any names, but I just noticed one of the most explosive, fastest DBs in the history of the combine has been traded before his rookie contract ends. I know the fastest DB in the history of the combine I trained didn't make it out of first camp.
Right.
Now I do know Tariq Woolen, who's one of the fastest DBs, came in and watched Justin Simmons and Cortland Sutton do a test and finally looked at me and said, I got to slow down, don't I? I said, yes. And he applied it right then. He went on to become a Pro Bowl corner. So there's ways where it's like telling us now this data of how do you play fast? And that's what's just intrigued me the last 4 to 5 years is let's get guys fast always. Let's get them as fast as possible. Let's give them the exposures to it. But then let's learn how to play fast and prevent injuries most.
I think it's super insightful what you said there. And I think it's something that, you fight in this when you're trying to drive performance, right? You never want to pull back on an athlete. You never want to discourage them from coming in and doing extra and those types of things. But we all know that like sometimes that's coming at a detriment. There's a cost, benefit ratio there. And the fact that you've been able to use, lasers and different things to be able to show the athletes how it's applicable to sport. That's the magic stuff right there is when you're able to kind of to visualize that for the athletes, to show them the results and for them to feel it, in their performance. And so, you've always been a guy what I love about you is that you're a guy that give me a stopwatch and a whistle and I can control 1,000 people but you're also a guy that invented the Shredmill and is pushing technology and lasers and GPS and all these different things. How do you decide what goes into the program? Like when these new tools come about, what kind of filters do you put that through?
I look at, like we talked about a little bit before we came on, I look at either developing force or form for speed. And then I try to break it down how we're going to fix it. Right. And like I'm diving into force plate data now because I know there's a whole adage of, not just how high you jump, but how fast you jump. But I get into a problem where combine's still measuring how far and high I jump. They're not looking how fast I do it. Now, we as coaches may say, I don't care if you jump 36 inches, it's how fast you get 36 inches. Right. So the performance metric, I think a lot of people are diving into force plates aren't applicable to me for combine, but they're very applicable to game speed.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, to try to teach someone the easy way to do that, I always want to come up with an easy way. I say broad jump. See how far you broad jump and land. Now do that 3 times and put a mark down. Now try to go 3 reflexive broad jumps and beat your mark.
That's right.
If you can't go 3 reflexive broad jumps and beat your mark, you're not reflexive enough. If you go 3 consecutive broad jumps without pausing and beat your mark, you're reflexive enough. Now I'd like the video from the side and see how fast can you do it. And that kind of takes away some of all the data of force plates of that. And it's a simpler way to do it. So I try to find something that's complex and then try to find a simple way to do it in groups, right? Because as you know, you probably do a lot more force plate data than I do. But like we have a group and it's like, all right, we get some of it. And I see so many people, oh, we did it as a counter movement jump as a readiness test. Like, what'd you do with it? And as like, what'd you do with it? Cool. Right. We're tracking counter movement jump and seeing how it tracks during the day or the year. Okay. Well, there's a lot more to that than that. So I try to find something that's complicated and then try to find a simple way to do it in a group and try to find that works. And then like I've had to change more to data and proving our stuff works. I think maybe one because of my age too. I'm 51 now, but when I was in my early 30s, like I think a lot of people thought I just worked out with the athletes. And I did it to prove that if they were faster and more powerful than me, but they couldn't move as good as me, there was a problem. Right. So I used to work out with them all the time. Now what I've learned with data is I wasn't a fast, powerful guy. They thought I was because I didn't get tired, which the bunk says don't condition anymore. No, like if you condition, that's as important as the max reserve effect. If I'm fast, it transfers down. If I'm in shape, it transfers down. I just say don't condition at the wrong time, right? But since I was in shape and not fast, I think now I was able to change directions better than all my pro athletes. So back in the day, I was outside outrunning them, and they thought I was, oh, you run a 4.2 or 4.3. I'm like, I can barely break 4.7, but it looked faster. So I didn't know why back then. I just thought it was because I was quicker than them. But now that what I know now with what data's showing me, I don't think I was quicker than them. I think I was running at a more controlled speed that was conducive for agility than them.
Right.
And so a lot of it is my age and just me learning has changed the way I train. But I try to look at metrics of a guy, and if it's combine, try to get him more explosive and faster and try to break only that apart. If it's speed for football, we try to look at not a bunch, but a decel metric, a turning metric, and a comeback metric for agility. And then we can bucket if you're weak at one of those.
Yeah, I think, it's such a hard, it's the same that you've got in the in the performance space as we do in the team sports space of recruiting and having enough bells and whistles and things like that that are going to be the flash. I call it the sugar, right? Like, to me, as long as I have the meat and potatoes, like as long as I'm able to do that, I don't care. You can give me, I'll throw whatever sugar you want in there, right?
Yep.
But how do you, when you're recruiting these athletes? I mean, you even gave me an example off camera, of a kid that was running maybe a 4.4, 4.5 that wants, I want to run a 4.2. How do you go about building that relationship with the athlete to have them understand that, these incremental changes that you're making are going to benefit them, but maybe they're delusional in their goals of, what's the end product?
Yeah, I have a different trend. I think you've probably seen it too. I think high school kids are faster than people give them credit for when they're trained correctly. And then they go to college and they stay as fast or get a little faster, but they get a lot bigger, right? Like
Sure.
the momentum index, right?
Yeah.
So the first thing we have to do is ground a kid of, hey, you're not a 160-pound DB in high school running a 4.55. Now you're 208 pounds running a 4.58, right? Like you didn't get slower at college. Like you gained 30 to 40 pounds and you're still a 4.5. That's fast. Now we have to break down those metrics of what are we going to do to get you to a 4.3 to 4.2. Luckily speaking, we've had some extremely fast guys recently, but it wasn't always like that. People now say, oh, they just recruit fast guys. That's like you at Alabama, like, oh, they just recruit all the 5-stars. If it's that easy that we just get to pick every 5-star and they come to us, it would be a lovely world. But it's not like that. You get a collection of athletes and you're trying to make the great ones legendary, the above average ones great, and the average ones above average. And that's all we do at XPE. So we try to bring them in and ground them with some testing. We try to explain to them, like, look, you're going to go through, this is stupid, 8 weeks of training for not football. And it wasn't, your school was never doing it wrong. They were preparing you for football. And that's why you're ranked so high. Now we got to prepare you for running in underwear, right? So now, like more like what you said is, we got to totally have them buy into working less. And if they don't buy into working less, we got a problem. So some of our laziest guys are our most elite performers at Indy, and it's crazy.
Counterintuitive.
It's totally counterintuitive, but if we can convince, so you got to get the lazy guys to push the needle a little bit because they do still have to hit thresholds, but you got to get the hard workers to slow down and stop, and that's something we're always battling. So I think we have a good enough track record now where players will listen to us more, but I mean, it was hard to get players to buy into some people working less at the beginning. So
when you get those athletes, especially those college athletes that just got done finishing, physical season, they're beat up, they're, when you're going through your evaluation, how do you go about getting a true evaluation of a guy, knowing, at that fatigue state? What are some of the tests that you're using, and how do you go about really creating that snapshot, that picture of what they're currently at and what they can potentially be?
Yeah. So we'd never run a 40 with them the first week. That's like a common misconception. Oh, you're going to time a kid when he's off a season and tell him he's a 4.65 and then improve him to 4.38 and take all the credit. I'm like, no. Like he's off a season. So we're going to see just how he explodes, how he accelerates, and how he moves smoothly. But we'll do a 20 to 10 yard fly. I don't even want to sprint him 40 yards when they start. And we'll give him four times to run. And we'll try to do it within the first 3 or 4 days. And hopefully he hasn't just got off a season, but sometimes they have. And we'll tell him to do it in an order where it's supposed to increase intensity, right? And when you increase intensity, you should increase speed. Well, if you start in that session increasing intensity and your speed's not getting faster, we stop the session. And I say, hey, you may be faster. And right now you're only running the speed of whatever, 4.65. You may be a true 4.5, you're just not ready to do it yet, which means I can get you to a 4.4 or 4.3. So let's just be smart with it and, get some 10 yards and 20 yards in, get some opens up in, and we can come up with a pretty good estimation of your 40 within hundredths of a second without you having to run one. So that's what we do. And it was 4 or 5 years ago I implemented that. I mean, 5 to 6 years ago when I was still always proved myself. I did. I 40 timed them at the beginning, had to give it to their agents and had to say, here comes your 2 to 3 tenths off of that, and I had to do it to back myself up. Now I've come off that ego and just say, I'm going to do what's better for the athlete. And so starting 4 or 5 years ago, I implemented the new systems and predicting guys' 40s. And it's not easy. It's easy. It's math, or it's what miles per hour you hit. It's not hard. And we estimate their 40, and then a few guys would be like, I don't run that slow. I'd be like, okay, who wants to go outside and time a 40 and say that these numbers are wrong? And I'll give you $1,000 if you beat it by 500ths of a second. And we would have people come out there, and they'd run 40s, and they wouldn't beat it by 500ths. Some would be slower, some would be right on. And everybody that raised their hand for $1,000, like it'd be 1 or 2 guys would run, nobody else would run. So we kind of tricked and taught guys, don't run, let's not get injured at the beginning or prove an ego to me on how much we improved you, or an ego to you, how fast you really are. Let's look at some simple sound metrics that we know we're going to improve. And then I always say you go to Indy and roll the dice because the timing isn't as specific as our metrics.
Yeah. So you're doing a 2010. I know you put a lot of value in the broad jump as well. Are there any other tests that you're kind of using to get a true evaluation?
Our key metrics are, we look at broad jump, just explosion, 5-10 fly, acceleration metric. And really, people are trying to predict a 40 from a 5-10 fly. That's like impossible. There's too much room. Right. But that 5-10 fly tells you your acceleration qualities, right? Yeah. And then the 20-10 fly, how many miles per hour you're hitting by 30, basically, can really predict your 40 pretty good. Now, from that 20 to 10 fly, people may say, well, I'm faster than that. Okay, well, then you must have a better start, and I believe you. Or I can tell them your acceleration metrics sucked, right, and your back end was okay. You are not faster than that. So we use the 20 to 10 fly to really predict their 40, and then kind of look at their acceleration metrics and say, yeah, you may be under this or over this, but we got a good range. Let's move. Those are the only 3 things I look at: broad, 5-10 fly, 20-10 fly. Would I look at GPSs if we could get outside all the time and do all that? Yeah, I'd look at, but I would just replace the 5-10 fly with a peak excel and the 20-10 fly with a max speed. Once when we take our guys out 6 weeks later and run 40s, again, we have it predicted to what they're going to run based off what they've done the 6 weeks. And last year, 35 guys outside. Our average was supposed to be 4.49 on that day, and our average was 4.496. Now, some were under it and some were over it because that's timing, but it's not that hard. So broad, 5-10 fly, 20-10 fly is all we look at. And then we use it, like the Shredmill has a heavy load setting, which is like running with heavy sleds, a medium low setting, which is running with lighter sleds. That correlates strongly with your 5-10 fly, 20-10 fly. We may we're trying to change it a little bit to where we may start looking at who's a better downward loader versus who's an up fast loader for jumping, and see if we can help that. We had a couple guys that were the fastest of the position: Peyton Wilson from NC State and Nate Wiggins from Clemson. They were fastest linebacker and DB there the year, but they both couldn't broad jump as far as on the metric as far as they could stand up and run long flies. And then when you put them in a 40-yard start, their 20-yard split sucked, but it was all because they were coming out of a low power position. So everything was telling us power with him. Just improve these 2 guys' powers and let them stand up and fly. But that is our program anyway, so we didn't change much with them. But I'm like, we do have stuff we could change on the opposite of that. And that's what we're kind of trying to dive into.
You mentioned the Shredmill in there. I know that's something that, I go back to the old Frapier program and obviously, I know you have, you find value in that as well, but where does the Shredmill fit into the programming piece for development?
I loved the Frapier treadmill back in the day because it made me seem fast against Chris Carter and Randy Moss, because I was a quick guy that didn't get tired. Right. I could get my heel to snap fast, my knee to lift high, and spin my arms fast. So I would run up hills, I'd run flats as fast as Randy Moss on a treadmill. We'd go outside, and Randy's circle was big. His downstroke was big. I'd run a lot faster than Jamal Lewis on a moving treadmill that had to float. But once when Jamal Lewis's downforce got in the mix, he was 250 and faster than me. Right. So I knew back then when we were running on those highly motorized treadmills, we were missing a huge component, and that's power, right? Downforce. Right. And that's why track people hated them. And I used to say, yeah, but if I'm using them to run up hills for stride length mechanics or flat for turnover mechanics, and doing it with good form, if I'm applying sleds and legs at a correct ratio, I'm training speed. So that's why I developed the Shredmill, is because I used to have all these broken woodways. One was pushing, one's up a hill we stride out on our own power. One's flat where we're spinning and trying to keep up with, and it was explosion, increase our stride length, turn over our stride length was the series we were trying to hit. And this mechanical engineer saw me, and he developed a piece of equipment with me And it really took out our need for sled training.
Right.
And it let us not have to go outside to do sleds. It just let us start supersetting high intensity acceleration doses in with leg training and jumping exercises.
Right.
So I love how people have changed from, just conditioning and lifting and no sprint training to, well, let me go at least get some jumping and sprinting in first and then legs, right? And I don't know what's better, jump, sprint, lift, or sprint, jump, lift. Jumping is actually more ground contacts than sprinting. So sprinting is less ground contact time. So which one do you put first? But it's a whole nother argument, right? But everyone's jump, sprint, lift now, or jumps are opposite, but they lift last. And I'm like, Kyle Dietz, he calls them performance circuits too. And I called it that before I listened to Kyle Dietz. But it was like this whole French contrast method of overloading and deloading something has always worked with weights. I'm like, we do that with Shredmills now in a weight room where we'll do a heavy lift and then we'll deload with the jump. And then we'll do a heavy acceleration set with the Shredmill. Then we'll deload with the sprint. Now, whatever we choose to overload the weight in the jumps or the sprints is a little different, but the Shredmill doesn't change. There's just two main settings you do. And guys get on there and it's like you watch guys compete with bar speed. And they start going harder when they're seeing a metric pop up. They compete on Shredmill speeds, but then I can go back and look at the graph and say, at this heavy load, you should have increased speed for 2.0 to 2.5 seconds. You got a great number, but you got it in 1.6 seconds. Hold your power longer, 3 or 4 more steps, and maybe you'll get a high. So it helps. And a lot of people are like, oh, all that little stuff doesn't matter. And I'm like, you're right, it doesn't, but it does because the difference between 460 and 442.18 is a blink of an eye. Literally a blink of an eye. If you Google what's a blink of an eye, they tell you 0.15 to 0.40. Like on a paper, 442 is blazing past 460. It's a blink of an eye. So we have to find how many different ways in a session can we get a blink of an eye better by the end of the 6 weeks. So I'm like, those little things do matter a lot.
Obviously when we were in school, we didn't necessarily learn peak velocity, max velocity, and, all these scientific terms that are kind of fitting into, what we knew from maybe a practical sense. What is your learning strategy? I mean, you're talking, Cal Dietz and, you're throwing these different people in there. How do you force yourself to stay current? And what advice would you have for a young coach that's just starting their career that this thing's going to change 1,000 ways in 20 years?
Yep. That's what I love because I don't think the speed has changed that much in 20 years besides a lot of new adopters coming in for speed, as I'm sure you've seen, right? That's what I meant by the data is just proving some early innovators were maybe correct. And no one proved speed. Everybody just started doing it the same way that was successful, I think. But the agility and the movement is I think the game changer next. And just picking a simple metric. I always tell people to look at something simple that you could track whenever you want, but you don't need to, right? Because sometimes like my guys get overloaded. What are we tracking today, Tony? And I'm like, nothing today. We're just going to work, we're going to work today, we'll track. So, but sometimes if you have easy metrics you can track and it doesn't need to be tons of stuff. It can be like, today we're working on acceleration, but the only thing we're really looking at is what speed you hit on the Shredmill. Okay, today we're working acceleration, but the only metric we're really looking at is what you're hitting on the bar speed before our acceleration set. We're working acceleration today, but the only acceleration metric we're looking at is the 5-10 fly. Pick something simple, and sometimes like what I do is just pick one thing that guys are competing on in a 4-part circuit, Now, Alabama and other schools, I don't know how dialed in you have it, but like there's technology that will sit there and track everything while they're doing it, and you can just get this huge report. Well, guys like me don't have that money and staff to do, and then I know high schools and private like gyms don't. So I'm like, just pick something simple. That's why for speed, I picked broad jump, 5-10 fly, 20-10 fly. That's all I look at. Right. Am I going to build to that? Yeah, but like it starts with there. And then for game speed, I look at a decel quality, a turn quality, and a comeback quality. So it's those 3 things, and then I build and add onto that. And I'm trying with young coaches not to adopt my system, but telling them if they want to copy mine, here it is on the platform like RockDaisy. Here are my just use it, but know why we're using it in case you want to change something.
Go ahead. Yeah, finish your thought.
Yeah, you don't like broad jump. You like looking at their counter movement jump on a force plate. Great. Who cares? It's an explosion metric. You know,
That's right.
you don't like triple broad jump for art. You like looking at jump pad RSI. Great, it's the same metric. I don't think you need to look at more than one metric per thing. Pick one you like, you understand, and you know you can easily do, and just track a few things and go at it.
Yeah, it's what you said there was the biggest. It's the biggest challenge I see young coaches facing right now is that you take some of these internships at some of these places that have all these resources, and you become too reliant on it, and you don't understand the mechanics behind it, and you don't understand that a lot of times you're going to find yourself in situations where you don't have those tools,
Yeah.
and so getting back to the nuts and bolts, I think that's really the key. But we end this show with a bunch of quick questions here, so we'll lean into that. What's another mistake that you see young coaches make that right now?
Like, well, you kind of said it. Fancy is better. I mean, you said meat and potatoes. I say meat and potatoes. I'm like, the meat and potatoes of our speed program is heavy and fast legs and heavy and hard acceleration to 15 yards. I said, once when we figure out to get you better at that, for my speed, that's your meat and potatoes. Now you got dressing, which is something else. So being fancy isn't better, I don't think.
Yeah, agreed. If you could shadow any coach for a week, who'd it be and why?
Someone like you, someone like, I'm going to mention like Skylar Main at BYU. And the reason why I mention him is because I sold him a Shredmill, and he was working in the private sector, and he's working with BYU athletes, and they brought him in. And I'm like jealous of guys like you that get to watch a whole year turn over and a guy come back for year 2 and stuff like that. And I get a guy for 6 weeks and roll the dice, and then I'll get him back for 3 weeks here, maybe 6 weeks here. And I'm just trying to keep him safe. But I want to intern under like, not a pro, but like a college strength coach that like understands like it's hard. It's always problem solving, and see what they go through.
Yeah, I would say with NIL, we might only have them for 8 weeks too now, but
yeah, that's funny. Yeah.
What's a book or resource that you've revisited the most in your career?
I'm so bad I haven't read a book. I try to find 2 new people online and then read about them. I'm bad. I don't read books like strength and conditioning coaches could. For so long I'm bad about this. I was in a lab, like XPE lab training, and I had the bad mentality of like, I don't want to look outside of what's in my room, because then people are going to think I copied them. Yeah. And I didn't want anybody to think I copied them. For so long, I never read a book or looked at what was outside the box. And now, the past 5 years, I've been trying to dive into what else do I need to study. So I don't have a go-to book. I do have some go-to people. And when they tell me to research something, I do it.
Yeah. Well, I think to me, that's the best way. That's the number one way that I learned as well is instead of, just reading maybe Joe Kin's book or Cal Dietz's book or whatever, I would go straight to the source, and I would basically interview Cal Dietz and get
funny you say that, because I talk to Joe Kin all the time. Like, he's like, I knew I'm never, look at me, I'm never going to be a strength and conditioning coach like Joe Kin. Like, being able to convince guys to get massively strong and fast, right? Or strong and powerful. But I've tried to learn, like, from him, what can I take from what you know to apply to what I do?
Right. Yeah, that's the best way. That's the best way to learn. I think you get that, and then you apply it to your own situation.
Yep.
What's the best piece of coaching advice you ever received?
Show up. Just my first job was gotten because I kept knocking on the door of a Washington Wizard and Washington Capitals strength coach, and he, finally told me, "You're not gonna quit showing up. I'll give you a job." But it's the same as training and coaching. It's like, I think we've forgotten that what hard work is, like training wise, and like coaches wanting to be given stuff too early. I look at like your situation, or I pick Saban because he came from, like, everybody looks at these coaches in y'all's situation and they're like, oh, they make so much money, I want that job. I'm like, you have no idea how long they've stayed in it and how hard they work to get there. So when you're 25 years old and you saying you want their job, that's a 15-year plan, right. So show up. Like, show up. So that's the main thing I can say is just show up and show work ethic.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice. And just, put your head down, make the best of where you're at. And if you make the big time where you're at, people will find you. That's for sure. And you got to do a little bit of networking, things like that. But I mean, at the same time, that's the foundation. That's the meat and potatoes for sure.
Yeah. Show up and work. Yeah.
And I appreciate you being on the show. I've followed you from afar for quite some time. I went through the game speed course. You and I have spoken at clinics together and things along those lines. And there's very few people that walk the walk, that, that'll get out, will demonstrate, will do the things. will be a great example, have the energy, especially our age, and continue to pour into their athletes and let that overflow into other coaches. And I think that, those are the people that I like to surround myself with and have a lot of respect for, and just appreciate what you've done for this industry, appreciate what you've done for the community. And man, thanks for being on this show.
Damn, I appreciate that a lot. Means a whole lot. Means a lot.